Greetings, adventurers. You're listening to The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood with me, Professor Atwood. I'm glad you're here, and I can't wait to tell you about my latest journey. Don't worry, it's a safe space. I'll handle all the danger for you. I designed these stories to help you relax, chill anxiety, and go to sleep. Maybe they'll even put a smile on your face, even if it's a sleepy smile. So please, settle in, relax, and prepare to quietly drift off with me to parts known, unknown, and even some places in between. Comfortable? Very well. Let's get underway. Good evening, adventurers. I hope you're doing well. I also hope you're all cozy and settled in because tonight I'm going to tell you about how I solved the power problem on a Minion personal transport vehicle, got a warning about generosity and my submarine, and began to speculate about what's really going on with Professor P and his minions. Now, as you remember, Professor P challenged me to 3 science challenges. If I completed all 3, he would tell me the whereabouts of my missing mentor, Professor Sampson, who went missing years ago. Now, there was much more to it than that, and more mysteries than I was anticipating. The first mystery being his new girlfriend, who happened to be my ex-wife, Julia. Needless to say, it does not sit well when your ex-wife is dating your evil science nemesis. While Julia told me the story and how they met and fell for each other over a mutual love of neuromorphic engineering, I was sure there were some pieces missing from that story as well. But there was one advantage, and that was that she was able to curate one of the challenges and give me an easy win. The first science challenge was to create a lava lamp, which I did, and I even combined it with an aquarium, so I completed the challenge in style. But in addition to the mystery of being baited to complete these challenges, there was also the mystery of the secret island lair Chef Chet, who was sending me helpful but cryptic notes in my lunches. I had an ally on the island, but other than beating these challenges, I was worried about what I may also need an ally for. I couldn't see the whole picture yet, and I was concerned that when I did, it would be troubling. I was in the middle of the second science challenge and thinking about how Professor P had successfully baited me and appealed to my science ego, and I am sorry to say it worked. He gave me an extremely difficult challenge, even with the use of the Infinite Science Cabal's engineering lab. I had to design a personal transport device that was capable of hovering at least 10 feet off the ground and to be safe for science villain minions. The issue was that in order to hover, I needed, hovercraft fans, which required a lot of power, and the batteries to power those fans would make them too heavy. I was halfway through the challenge, and the personal transport device was operational, but still tethered to a power supply. I had dinner with my ex-wife Julia and had to have 2 desserts, but that's a whole other thing. Anyway, she told me to think outside the battery box, which gave me an idea. I thought about it as we finished our chocolate lava cake, which was delicious. I'd forgotten what a good cook she was, and I once again complimented her on the new way she was wearing her hair. She thanked me and turned away, embarrassed by the compliment, or perhaps for another reason. Anyway, I thanked her for the dessert and went off to bed. In the morning, I had a power and weight issue to solve for the Minion personal transport system, and I was, running out of time. But before I tell you about how I solved the power issue and started to put the whole mystery together, I want to tell you about a few things. The first thing is that there was a technical glitch with one of the podcast digital show carriers called Spotify, and I suspect Professor P had contacted them to remove the show. Unfortunately, he temporarily succeeded, and I had to have Bradley go over to the Spotify World Headquarters office at an undisclosed location on yet another uncharted island and straighten things out. So, good news, the show is back on Spotify, and we apologize for any audio inconvenience. And as always, we want to thank you for all your support and for being here and listening to our stories. It's much appreciated, and we're also warmed by all the positive comments the show has received over the years. And thank you to all the Patreon White Cat Adventurers Club members. It is much appreciated. An extra special thanks to those of you that recently upped your pledge or decided to join recently. We will be putting some extra content in there, usually in the form of my journals or other White Cat Entertainment behind-the-scenes info or content. Also, there are two types of shows in the podcast high-speed show feed. There are the regular episodes, such as what you're listening to right now, and Professor Atwood's Sleepscapes to give you more adventures per month. The Sleepscapes are pulled directly from my adventures, with all the music and sounds we collect on our journeys. We then remix and remaster them and make them longer, so you can create your own adventure in your mind as you settle in and drift off to sleep. And as always, don't forget to rate and review the show, and maybe post about the show, as that's how other adventurers find us. And if you want more info, merchandise, and donation and ad-free Patreon subscription options, you can always go to whitecatentertainment.com. All right, let's get back to the story. I had just finished having dessert with my ex-wife, and I was full, tired, but also on a sugar high from having 2 desserts. Regardless, I had to go to bed and sleep on the power and weight issue at hand. I went to my room, and it turns out I was so tired I had no trouble going to sleep. The extra sugar did its best to keep me awake, but to no avail. I was asleep moments after my head hit the pillow. I dreamed of my ex-wife, my science nemesis Professor P, and how to make a hovering personal transport vehicle functional without adding any weight to the chassis. So I can't say it was a completely restful sleep, but I got what I needed. The next morning was bright and sunny, and I took some time to just look outside my barred window and enjoy the amazing view. I could see most of the island, including the beach and the waterfall. The monkeys continued to play and go about their business, now clearly used to the fact that a fake volcano had been built on their formerly uninhabited island. After a hearty breakfast, I was back to work in the engineering lab. But what was interesting was that Professor P must have been quite busy, as he took no time in the morning to sneer or taunt me. I wasn't sure if that made me feel relieved or more nervous. However, I began to wonder if he was still on the island at all, as all the minions seemed more relaxed, no one was guarding me, and they let me use the minion cafeteria, where I was able to use the omelet bar. However, Chef Chet was there, and looked me right in the eye as he made my spinach, cheese, and bacon omelet. He wished me good luck, but I knew there was more to it. But even with Professor P gone, he couldn't speak freely, which I understood. Regardless, breakfast was delicious, and there was a fruit salad with all different exotic and tropical fruits like dragon fruit, which, as I've said before, is well worth your time. I suppose I will say, reluctantly, if there was one positive thing Professor P did, it was feed his minions well. But I wondered if Chef Chet had more to do with that than Professor P. Regardless, my belly was full, and it was time to tackle the back half of Science Challenge number 2, which was my power and weight problem for the Minion personal transport vehicle. I returned to the engineering lab without supervision, and I could tell the Minions really just pretty much did what they wanted when Professor P was away. I mean, that's pretty much a sign that you're not a good boss. I mean, being a maniacal, evil science villain in a fake volcanic lair aside, of course. I powered up my prototype again, and once again had it hover the required 10 feet. It was still tethered with a power supply, though. And then I remembered something my ex-wife Julia said, that I should be thinking outside the battery box. maybe I was looking at this from the wrong angle. Maybe it wasn't a weight and power issue. Maybe it was just a power issue. What if I could get the power to the Minion personal transport vehicle remotely? I would definitely have the materials here in the engineering lab. I looked around the lab briefly and verified, yes, this was the lab that was well stocked. It could work. I mean, I would have to make it work. I had to complete this challenge successfully, and I was running out of time. And yes, I was definitely talking about Wi-Fi power transfer. You see, Wi-Fi power transfer, or WPT, also called wireless energy transmission, or WET, is the transmission of electrical energy without wires as a physical link. In a wireless power transmission system, an electrically powered transmitter device generates a time-varying electromagnetic field that transmits power across space to a receiver device. The receiver device extracts power from the field and supplies it to an electrical load. The technology of wireless power transmission can eliminate the use of wires and batteries, thereby increasing the mobility, convenience, and safety of an electronic device for all users. Wireless power transfer is useful to power electrical devices where interconnecting wires are inconvenient, hazardous, or just not possible. Wireless power techniques mainly fall into two different categories, near and far field. In near field or non-radiative techniques, power is transferred over short distances by magnetic fields using inductive coupling between coils of wire, or by electric fields using capacitive coupling between metal electrodes. Now, inductive coupling is the most widely used wireless technology. Its applications include charging handheld devices like phones and electric toothbrushes, RFID tags, induction cooking, and wireless charging or continuous wireless power transfer in implantable medical devices like cardiac pacemakers or electric vehicles. In far field or radiative techniques, also called power beaming, power is transferred by beams of electromagnetic radiation like microwaves or laser beams. These techniques can transport energy longer distances but must be aimed at the receiver. Proposed applications for this type include solar power satellites and wireless powered drone aircraft. Of course, this doesn't include Professor Chinnery's experiments with popcorn popping from 2 miles away using a laser beam. I mean, it worked, but none of us at the science conference was really sure of its practical application. He insisted there was one, something about mobile and floating movie theaters, but then he just sort of trailed off. The last I heard, he was working at a Renaissance fair making breakaway lances for jousting knights and trying to make them reusable. Professor Chinnery always did lack focus. Anyway, wireless power transfer is a generic term for a number of different technologies for transmitting energy by means of electromagnetic fields. The technologies differ in the distance over which they can transfer power efficiently, whether the transmitter must be aimed at the receiver, and in the type of electromagnetic energy they use. Time-varying electric fields, magnetic fields, radio waves, microwaves, infrared, or visible light waves. In general, a wireless power system consists of a transmitter device connected to a source of power, such as a main power line, which converts the power to a time-varying electromagnetic field, and one or more receiver devices which receive the power and convert it back to DC or AC electrical current, which is used by an electrical load. At the transmitter, the input power is converted to an oscillating electromagnetic field by some type of antenna device. Now, I will say the word antenna is used loosely here. It may be a coil of wire which generates a magnetic field, a metal plate which generates an electric field, an antenna which radiates radio waves, or a laser which generates light. A similar antenna or coupling device at the receiver converts the oscillating fields to an electrical current. Now, an important parameter that determines the type of waves is the frequency, which determines the wavelength. Now, wireless power uses the same fields and waves as wireless communication devices like radio, another familiar technology that involves electrical energy transmitted without wires by electromagnetic fields, used in cell phones, radio and television broadcasting, although that's getting rarer and rarer, and of course Wi-Fi. In radio communication, the goal is the transmission of information, so the amount of power reaching the receiver is not so important as long as it is sufficient that the information can be received intelligibly. Now, in wireless communication technologies, only tiny amounts of power reach the receiver. In contrast, with wireless power transfer, the amount of energy received is the important thing. So the efficiency or fraction of transmitted energy that is received is the most significant parameter. For this reason, wireless power technologies are likely to be more limited by distance than wireless communication technologies. But look, I really didn't need to transmit power across great distances. I would just need to create a viable power transmitter. It could even be made mobile and put on a helicopter or an airplane. When I thought about that, it gave me pause for a moment. And I remembered some of the warnings my chef benefactor, Chet, had given me. Beware of your own success, Professor. It wasn't fully clear what he meant, but I was beginning to have some idea. But as I said before, if I didn't complete these science challenges successfully, every other mystery would be moot anyway, and I'd never find my lost mentor, Professor Sampson. I had no choice but to continue working. I would have to install a receiver into the Minion transport vehicle and build a Wi-Fi power transmitter. Luckily, like I said, I was already in the engineering lab and everything I needed was right here. Well, with a little clever machining and engineering, of course. But getting back to wireless power transfer. Now, wireless power transfer may be used to power up wireless information transmitters or receivers. This type of communication is known as wireless power communication, or WPC. When the harvested power is used to supply the power of wireless information transmitters, the network is known as simultaneous wireless information and power transfer, SWIPT, or SWIPT. I don't know if people call it SWIPT, though. Whereas when it is used to supply the power of wireless information receivers, it is known as a wireless powered communication network, or WPCN. I'm not really sure if saying that acronym even saves any time. It's like saying WW2 instead of World War II. Anyway, an important issue associated with all wireless power systems is limiting the exposure of people and other living beings to potentially injurious electromagnetic fields. Now, I can pretty much guarantee you Professor P didn't care about such things, especially when it comes to the safety of his minions. But I couldn't in good conscience complete the Minion personal transport vehicle without adding some shielding. Minions are people too. Now, far-field methods achieve longer ranges, often multiple kilometer ranges, where the distance is much greater than the diameter of the device or devices. High-directivity antennas or a well-collimated laser light produce a beam of energy that can be made to match the shape of the receiving area. The maximum directivity for antennas is physically limited, of course, by diffraction. But yes, to answer the question you're thinking right now, you can beam energy with laser light with the right equipment. In general, visible light, like from lasers, and microwaves from purpose-designed antennas, are forms of electromagnetic radiation that are best suited to energy transfer. The dimensions of the components may be dictated by the distance from transmitter to receiver, the wavelength, and the diffraction limit used in standard radio frequency antenna design, which also applies to lasers. The diffraction limit is also frequently used to determine an approximate spot size at an arbitrary distance from the aperture. Electromagnetic radiation experiences less diffraction at shorter wavelengths and higher frequencies. So, for example, a blue laser is diffracted less than a red one. Now, the Rayleigh limit, although originally applied to image resolution, can be viewed in reverse and dictates that the irradiance, or intensity, of any electromagnetic wave, such as a microwave or a laser beam, will be reduced as the beam diverges over distance at a minimum rate inversely proportional to the aperture size. The larger the ratio of a transmitting antenna's aperture, or laser's exit aperture, to the wavelength of radiation, the more of the radiation can be concentrated into a compact beam. Now, taking all of this into consideration, along with my time constraints, I concluded that microwave power beaming would be more efficient than lasers and is less prone to atmospheric attenuation caused by dust or aerosols such as fog. You certainly don't want to lose power because of dust or fog. You don't want a minion falling 10 feet because of sudden poor visibility. Now that I had a plan in mind, I had to get to work. I began working on a microwave power transmitter along with a microwave power receiver and converter, and time permitting, a new outfit for the minions which would provide an additional layer of radiation shielding. I honestly didn't know if I would have time to complete that, and I would also have to find Professor P's volcanic hidden layer textile lab as well. I mean, not every evil layer has a textile lab. I mean, they are good for creating matching uniforms en masse, but you can always just get them on demand nowadays. And the new generation of science villains, they don't really see the potential in evil clothing, or clothing used for nefarious purposes, so evil textile labs are a bit rare. Now, you still see the occasional exploding cufflink, but the ISP, the International Science Police, and other law enforcement agencies know to look for those now, after an unfortunate incident involving a department store mannequin and a genetically engineered walrus on Dapper Day in Barcelona 10 years ago. Fortunately, thanks to the quick thinking of the ISP, no one was hurt, a few minions were arrested, and the walrus was rescued and set free. And for every year after that, the ISP had an honored seat on a float during the annual Barcelona Dapper Day parade. But I digress. Anyway, I had a fair amount of work to do, but there was still no minion watching me, and the lab was quite quiet. I worked through the morning and was putting the finishing touches on the microwave power transmitter when a minion came in with my lunch. He didn't stay to watch me, so I knew Professor P was not inside the volcano. But I knew Chef Chet was, and I wondered if he had sent me another cryptic note. I opened my lunch, and it was a warm chicken breast sandwich with bacon and jack cheese with a honey mustard dressing. There was also another side of fruit with some peanut butter cookies. Honestly, I was so hungry and lunch looked so good, I almost missed the hidden note in my enthusiasm for such a delightfully prepared lunch. I read the hidden note first, and I still tried to hide my doing so in case there were cameras I wasn't aware of. I mean, I was aware of 3, but I doubt there were more, but better safe than sorry. The note was once again cryptic, but a bit more ominous, which left me concerned. It read, "Professor Atwood, I have warned you about your success, and that warning still stands. But there are other things I must warn you about, unfortunately. Beware of generosity, and beware of challenges that don't appear as challenges. I will help you where I can. Also, please make sure your submarine, the O2, is secured and fully operational." Well, there were a few things to unpack in that note, and I would unpack them as I unpacked my lunch. I learned from accidentally getting one of these hidden notes wet once that they were written on edible paper with edible ink, so I didn't have to burn them. I could just eat them, which is what I did. And I think Chet added a hint of cinnamon. Always going that extra mile, that Chef Chet. Anyway, back to the note. Yes, it was cryptic. Beware of generosity and challenges that don't appear to be challenges. That left a whole lot of room for interpretation, that's for sure. But the ending was not cryptic at all. That was very specific, and it made me wonder about my submarine. I had seen from the marks near the hatch there was an attempt to get inside when it was anchored outside the fake volcano, but once I brought it into the submarine dock, I had been checking on it periodically. Perhaps it was time I began doing that more often. After I completed this challenge, I would do just that. I thought about the note and its implications as I continued to work. I removed the power cables from the Minion personal transport chassis and began installing the wireless power receiver. There wasn't a lot of room for error, so I had to make sure the transmitter had an auto-tracking feature so the receiver was always getting power. I worked into the evening and saw no sign of watchful minions, Julia, or Professor P. Now, I suppose in a way that was helpful, as I always worked better unsupervised, even when I was a young scientist. I was worried I was running out of time, but according to Science Challenge rules, I would have until midnight, which was still hours away. But I would need every minute of that time. But something wasn't sitting right with me. I don't say this often, but I was worried about my submarine. I decided to lose a little time and check in on it. No one stopped me and no one followed me, which meant that Professor P and possibly my ex-wife Julia were still not home in the fake volcano. But where could they have gone, and why now when I'm in the middle of an important science challenge? I cautiously made my way back to the submarine dock. It was quiet, and there wasn't a lot of activity in the fake volcano right now. The minions went about their jobs nonchalantly, and it seemed like Professor P ran a tight ship, but only when he was there. Plus, with the budget cuts, I could tell there were a lot less minions than normal, and chances are they were also underpaid. I didn't have time to talk to any of them about their current evil careers, but I'll admit I was a little curious. Anyway, I reached the submarine dock and there was the O2 right where I left her, safe and secure. I did a quick scan with my tablet and saw everything was in order. There was nothing wrong, except there were about 15 tamper attempts to get into the hatch. All unsuccessful because of my redundant security systems made for just this type of situation. Well, not exactly this type, but close. My security systems can keep out everything from minions to yetis, and I have proven it time and time again. So the sub was secure. I was tempted to do an inspection of the inside of the sub just to be sure, but unfortunately, I just didn't have the time. I had to go back and finish Science Challenge number 2 and get my wireless power transmission working. I walked back to the engineering lab and thought about wirelessly transmitted power, microwaves, weight issues, couplings, and safety. Admittedly, it was a lot, but I was bringing it all together and should be able to finish in time. But it would be close. And I will tell you all about how I finished the second science challenge and what the unexpected consequences were for finishing next time. But before I end this evening's story, I want to talk to you about something. Warnings. Sometimes we get warnings from friends, colleagues, and even from our own bodies when we reach for that second piece of double chocolate cake. It's human nature to ignore warnings. Why? Because it's just easier. We're all guilty of it, including myself, and I did indeed regret that second piece of double chocolate cake. Anyway, my point is, try your best to hit that balance. Take risks, but acknowledge warnings too. You won't always get it right, but hey, that's often what science is, trial and error. So acknowledge warnings, take your risks, and protect your submarine. Godspeed, adventurers.
The Quiet Journeys of Professor Atwood was created, written, and performed by Chris Mancini and produced by White Cat Entertainment. It is a work of fiction. Maybe. Music and sound design by Ron Tansky at rontanskymusic.com. For more info and merchandise, including t-shirts, mugs, and blankets, go to whitecatentertainment.com.